Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic, and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. In modern metaphysical circles, we end up talking a lot about past lives, which I think can be really cool and really useful, or can be a little bit problematic. I think the wisdom of it's okay to look back but try not to stare is a really good idea. I've certainly seen people connect or resonate with a story and almost pull it forward as though they had survived that trauma in a contemporary way and not particularly move with it. On the other hand, it can be really useful. From time to time I do a soul retrieval and I start off my journey report saying, if you only look at this lifetime, you really don't see the story arc of everything that's in play in this lifetime. And it's very useful to have the context of what your soul was working on or experiencing. It can reveal the areas that we need to implement a little more growth mindset and things as learnable skills, because those of us who are old souls often have a lot of things come really easily and naturally, and then we get stymied about things we didn't explore as much in other lifetimes. If we were in an ashram, we might connect amazingly to source and be able to drop into deep, clear places, but struggle a bit with money or relationship because a lot of our life experience was in the context of having taken vows of celibacy or vows of poverty. And so a lot of times I find that souls want to diversify and experience other things. And knowing that, hey, I'm just not as good at this thing. And if I treat it as a learnable skill and give myself the grace to be exploring it in this lifetime, that can make things go more gracefully. The interesting thing about shamanism and past lives is, from what I was taught in the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, which studies shamanic traditions throughout the world and distills down core shamanism for a modern technological audience who doesn't have those upbringing kind of roots. It's a way of sharing shamanic knowledge in a way that isn't as vulnerable to cultural appropriation, because we're not saying that we understand what a particular culture uses a particular ritual for. We're looking at the common woven together themes and drawing on that as something that we might consider a universal human legacy. I really believe that if we go back far enough, all of our ancestors practiced shamanism, and it's something that is a birthright. We have this ability by nature of being human to train ourselves to go into an altered state and talk to the helping spirits. And I believe that the framework of seeing the world as alive and something that you can be in right relationship with is a powerful and useful framework with which to move through the world. My teachers would all say shamanism isn't a religion, as I'm using the term, but rather a framework and a set of tools and practices that get really good results. So what's interesting is the teachers from this tradition and in this context have told me that past lives really aren't something that you commonly see as part of modern indigenous shamanism, from the practices that are handed down from these unbroken lineages and people who are still practicing shamanism in contemporary ways, much as their ancestors did. So, as hopefully you've realized by now, what I'm working with is drawing on the power and the incredible gifts of shamanism to work with traditional modern challenges and difficulties and complexities. There are a lot of ways that most of our day-to-day lives look very different than those of our ancestors. And while some problems are universal, loss, illness, that we can work with in very similar ways, there's a lot of complexity to the modern world, credit card debt, interrupted sleep, excessive busyness, overstimulation, corporate America. There are all these really interesting systems and ways of doing life that we want to engage with in a way that is really effective for us being able to live our best lives in a way that's in integrity. And so while past lives are looking back into ancient times and can feel not so modern and contemporary, I do believe that the interest and the mastery with exploring and working with them is something of a modern concept and experience that is certainly shared by a larger percentage of humanity than previously, although admittedly most of the population probably doesn't believe in past lives. And it's okay if you don't believe in past lives. I'm all about take the frameworks that are useful and leave the rest. If you want to have me go deeper into this and a bunch of other things, you might check out my book, Practical Shamanism, A Guide for Walking in Both Worlds. So I go step by step and talk in more detail about how to work with past lives in that book, as well as a bunch of other things. But I want to share some wisdom on this podcast for how we can use shamanism to work with past lives and what's useful for someone to know about this so that you can work with it. So one of the sort of natural sequences of past lives, let's pretend that we weren't doing any facilitation or work or looking back. What I find, having worked with clients for over 20 years now, is that very often we end up with circumstances that mirror whatever was unresolved in past lives. While we often end up with circumstances that mirror things in past lives, I do believe that we have the opportunity to work through them. What tends to stand out in past lives often are moments where an emotional cycle was unresolved. So there was a betrayal or a loss that you weren't able to complete the emotional cycle on, and that ended up remaining with you. Often it's just really severe trauma. If you go back in history, humans didn't always play nice with each other. And one of the cool things, if you pick up a book called Angels of Our Better Nature, the author makes a highly researched case for how violence has actually really declined a lot, even taking into account the painful events that are happening in the world with humans being violent with one another. It actually is almost anywhere on the planet the safest time that we've ever lived or experienced as humans. So in a past life, if your whole family died of the bubonic plague or were killed as an army came through in the middle of a conflict, you may not have really had the opportunity. A lot of times we kind of had to get on with surviving, and humans are very good at temporarily pushing down emotion to deal with survival issues. We're kind of designed that way, and we don't always circle back. So sometimes we end up with this emotional debt of unresolved emotions from other lifetimes. Things that we felt chronically over and over and over again. You have that friend who's always mad at men or always bitter about, feeling taken advantage of in economic situations. And you could go 3 years and then you look at their Facebook post and they're ranting about exactly the same thing. When we have this kind of chronic thing, it creates some really strong patterning that can show up in this lifetime. So someone who really had a victim mentality in another lifetime, nothing was ever their fault, is going to be more vulnerable to resonating with those narratives in this lifetime. It also applies to things like chronic injuries. So if you had a one-time injury without a lot of emotion around it and the support to heal, that might not linger. But if you worked in the coal mines and had tight, painful lungs your whole life as a result of that, your lungs would be more vulnerable in this lifetime. So areas of our body that were chronically compromised, chronically having patterns of pain, when we use this soul essence to inform how our energy body is supposed to be, sometimes it carries forward these imprints and patterning emotionally or physically that mirror something from a past life. We also can have this disproportional reactivity. One of the sort of fun things I've gotten to do from time to time has been to do a past life clearing on a phobia. And sometimes the person wakes up the next day and they're just no longer afraid of drowning because we cleared the past life where that happened or the past lives where that happened. So, in the natural course of events, these things would tend to clear. As a former engineer who was really good at heat transfer and thermodynamics, I appreciate the law of entropy, which basically says that things that are really organized tend to go to disorganized unless energy is put in to sustain them. And that's true of trauma. It's true of horrible things that happen in past lives. Over the fullness of time, those patterns that are held, in my experience, in middle world, there's like a vignette that remains that I can travel back to, just tend to dissolve over time. So even a lesser trauma in this lifetime is going to be more acute and impactful. And also we have all the neuro patterning, because our instincts are all about trying to resolve the trauma in a way that's often misguided. It comes from good intentions. If you want to go deeper on that, one of my really early podcasts is on trauma and understanding what your brain is up to so you can get it out of the cycle of recapitulating the trauma in an effort to protect you from something that you're really safe from because you're never going to be 7 again, but because there's still charge, your brain keeps going over it and going over it. So that's a piece that happens with this lifetime trauma. We have all the neural pathways that get really established, whereas past life trauma is easier to clear because we can move entropy along with shamanism. We can speed it up and dismantle those structures. I do that on traumas in this lifetime and past lives, and then work to clear the imprint out of your field. So taking the coal miner example, I would track that lifetime or those lifetimes where your lungs were impaired, dismantle and release the energy. The information would still remain in your Akashic records. You'd still have the knowing of where you were, but you wouldn't have the middle world imprint that is still informing you of information. And from there, it's much easier to clear the blueprint or the imprint or this energetic structure out of the energy body of your lungs in this lifetime, which is informing the physical body, and we can replace it with the blueprint of health. So for those of you who are experienced with shamanism and looking to go to the next level, that sort of map may be really helpful for you in terms of being able to do something similar to what I do. There are many ways to work with past lives. Some people really like past life regression, where you complete an emotional cycle and that allows the energy to clear. The cool thing about past life work, or one of the cool things, we get a lot of collateral healing, which means when you take out one trauma or pain point that's anchored in another lifetime, there's often a domino effect of others releasing and unwinding. So it's really cool. You get a lot of benefit from this kind of work. And one of the things I really like about cleaning this up, honestly, I feel like people are more interested in past life healing than emotional and psychological healing from this lifetime sometimes. I think there's a lot of appeal of saying, I don't have to revise patterns, but there's something that happened, and if we clear that, I'll suddenly be free of this. And so I get people who say, I think I have a past life, and I get in with the guides and they're like, oh no, they have a this lifetime pattern, and it's complicated, and here are all the pieces. But one of the things when past life healing is relevant is it can be a really hidden energy leak. So when we go to try to move our circumstances or our results, let's say that person with the past life with the lung condition, they may just not get as much leverage. They may be doing all the right things and treating with really good doctors, and they make progress, but it just isn't as fast as you would expect in the context of their genetics and their lifestyle choices and all that kind of thing. And sustained right action will clear past life trauma without ever using the phrase past life or going into an energetic intervention. So if you had a shoulder injury and you went to physical therapy, it might take longer if there's a past life, but as you rehabilitate it and as you correct it and as you build it into health, you'll be clearing and dismantling the energetic patterning. So things can come from the soul to the energy body to the physical body, or from the physical body to the energetic body to the soul. So we can move and intervene at any level to get things to shift and change in really appropriate ways. But much like trauma that happens when we're pre-verbal, so we don't know about it, past life trauma isn't something that where we would have the option of connecting the dots. We don't have this context that says, oh, of course I have this not as healthy way of looking at things. Duh, it totally makes sense. I grew up with these narratives in my family of origin. Okay, I can do some, work to clean those up and install healthier ideas and cool beans. That'll be a good shift. So working with this is really useful. And the cool thing is, so I gave kind of my shamanic map very, very briefly for what I do when I'm working with past lives, that process of if the guides say the issue is past life, tracking the cord of energy back to the lifetime. I help the cycle to complete or the energy to be dismantled. If there's a soul part anchored in the past life, I help it to reintegrate with my client's higher self. And then having taken down that structure, I come back to them in current time and dismantle patterning or imprints from that past life. And then I ask the guides to install the healthy version, like the actualized version. So the healthy patterning of their lungs or their energy field without the heart armor because of a loss or a betrayal, whatever it may be, getting not only the pattern removed, but the energy body healthy and aligned in that area. So I find it a super fun, geeky, kind of thing to do, but that's a little more advanced. So you may be thinking, like, that sounds really super cool. If you have the rumblings that this is something that would be helpful and it's in your budget, I would certainly love the opportunity to work with you. But I do have limited client openings, and I think a lot more people need this support than necessarily I could work with in the course of my lifetime. And not everybody delves into being really geeky about mastering shamanic journey in order to be able to do this intricate work on behalf of themselves. So what I want to offer is some other ways to use your intention and focus, because that's really what shamanism is a work of intention and focus to be able to dismantle this without needing to have the feedback loop of being in an altered state, seeing it, tracking it, but being able and willing to still use your intention and focus to create results. So I have a really specific fire ceremony on the articles page of my website. If you go to handsoverheart.com, the resources tab, and then down to the articles page, you'll see fire ceremony there. And there's a video and there's a write-up. It's super specific. There are lots and lots of kinds of fire ceremony. This is a really specific one. And you can use it to clear energy out of your field that doesn't belong. And you don't necessarily have to know whether it's past life or whether it's ancestral or whether it's this lifetime trauma or whether it's a narrative that you believed or whether it's a, place where you've gotten these neurological pathways because you've ruminated on it for a lot of time. You can just work with putting into the fire the thing that you want to release and what you want to bring in. So going back to that lung situation, I release illness from my lungs. I release any imprints of illness that reside in my energy body. I clear any past lives that my lungs were damaged or compromised. I invite my lungs to be healthy and vibrant. And you could do this for betrayal. You could do this for never feeling like you have enough money. You could do this for not trusting people. I really like to think of trust as an inside job. So if I'm self-trusting, I can trust my discernment. And even if I get surprised in a way that I don't much enjoy, I can learn something from it and be more discerning the next time. So I trust that if I get disappointed by what someone does, I'll be able to heal and recover from it And I trust that mostly I have really good discernment. I think when you do your own shadow work and you get really intimate and connected with yourself, and you're seeing yourself more as you are, it really increases your ability to see other people, look at them with kind eyes, but also know when they're not reliable. Like, what can I trust you for? And if you're like, wow, this person's really struggling with addiction, I cannot trust them to have my best interests at heart. It's not in their field with what they're dealing with. And so that kind of clarity, I think, is really helpful. So it's always great to pair appropriate work, like, okay, I'm trying to rehabilitate my shoulder, do fire ceremony and also do your physical therapy exercises and care for that part of your body, because if we approach this on multiple levels, we get better results. But this fire ceremony, especially done daily for 21 days, or you could do it for 7 days. If there's a deep past life, you probably won't completely clear it in one fire ceremony, but you'll start to move the energy. And again, it may be enough that the rest continues to flow. But for something that you've really put your finger on and been like, I really see a theme here. I don't know where it comes from, but I want to clear it out. Fire ceremony is a really potent tool to be able to go in and use your intention and your focus and the wisdom and the power of the fire and the salt and the organizing principle of fire brought into service on your behalf to make a change and make a shift. Now, I say this as someone who is not particularly ritually inclined. A lot of people who practice shamanism are tremendously connected to tools and physical objects, which are incredibly supportive. I think it really comes down to whether you get a kick out of ceremony, if it feels delicious to you or if it feels tedious. And I've certainly taken pains to go through a number of ceremonies because I wanted to see if there was something I was missing out of impatience. And my conclusion is probably there's really cool stuff. And at the end of the day, I'm just not a ceremonialist. I'm more the engineer. How efficiently can we do it? And so I want to offer that I'm offering you fire ceremony in context of someone who doesn't do a lot of ritual. And so anytime I'm recommending a ritual, it's because it's laser focused and the amount of energy you put in versus the benefits out are incredibly on your side. I'm a huge fan of efficiency. And with the myriad of practices and possibilities we learn, there can just be this, ability to kind of get overwhelmed. Now, the natural course of living, if you're moving toward health, if you have some sort of facilitated inquiry or therapy that is aligned and doing what it's supposed to do, or a yoga practice or a qigong practice, or you do breath work, all of these things can move these patterns and imprints as well. There are many, many pathways, and what I really believe is that if we are moving our energy vibrantly and allowing emotional cycles to complete, a lot of times people don't let emotional cycles complete or shut them down. And you might just find that you have a loss that on paper seems kind of minor, and suddenly there's this huge upwelling of grief, and you just sob and sob and sob, and all of this moves through, and you aren't clinically depressed, and you aren't necessarily. Sometimes I've had times when I just sobbed when I felt no emotion, really weird sensation. I'm like, wow, something's releasing. I'm sobbing, tears are running down my face, and isn't that interesting? I'm not feeling any of the emotion. I got a lot of this after I got my attunements to Reiki, and I started doing Reiki on myself, especially with the sacral chakra. It was just clearing out a lot of old emotional debt. There was nothing that my brain needed to process, or my emotional matrix for that matter. It was just a release mechanism. And so what's really cool about getting these past threads that run to other experiences cleaned up is that it really frees us up to have all of our aliveness and ability to move in the present moment. I think one of the challenges of being human is our minds lock us out from so many possibilities. So someone else could look at your situation and go, wow, you have tons of choices. And you could feel like you're completely stuck with no options. And it's a funny quirk of how our instincts interact with our executive brain that is useful to understand so that it doesn't run the show. But good quality work in past life healing can really free up a lot of life force energy and freedom and new possibilities and release fear and help you to feel really safe in the world. And there's just a lot of cool stuff that goes along with this work. Now, it is important if you are tuning into the actual stories not to weave them into your identity. It's interesting. Sometimes I find people who were practitioners in other lifetimes. They were the shaman or the high priest or, in some other kind of role. And they had all the training so their conscious mind knew how to work with things, but they didn't get it in this lifetime. So there was someone who in a past life was a sin eater and had a ritual to then cleanse themselves of all this energy that they'd gathered from their community that allowed them to be fresh and free, and it was meaningful work and they were highly valued. So in this lifetime, they just started collecting pain from all their loved ones. And by the time I got to sit with them, they were really bogged down. And the way that we work with transmuting heavy energy in the modern era with the most up-to-date effective ways is never to bring it inside ourselves for transmutation or carry it on behalf of someone. We want to direct it into a transmutation cycle outside of us. Sure, you can pull illness into yourself and transmute it, but that's pretty dangerous, and there are just so much better ways to do it. It's like the extraction. When I took my extraction training of how to remove things, they shared the traditional shamanic way was this sucking. The shaman would put like a piece of fabric or something in their cheek for what they were extracting to go into, and then they would suck it out and then they would spit it out. And they said, that's useful for sort of psychological theater of like, there's this thing happening. But for, modern people in a classroom learning about shamanism, it's much safer not to suck out into yourself or even into something you're holding in your mouth illness or unbalance or energetic intrusions. It's better not to bring them into your field in any way as you remove them. So that was what we were trained in. And I know that sometimes, I certainly experienced this when I was in my 20s, was a kind of a bafflement for how much pain I had for having grown up in, a family that had its quirks and its dysfunctions, but overall was pretty needs met. And the modern psychological model was confusing because, yeah, my parents had their quirks, but really there was nothing that terrible or that bad, and yet I was having these, really intense responses to things. And some of that was just the energetic sensitivity and emotional reactivity that developed out of a lifetime of being overstimulated before I learned to put myself in a bubble and keep myself from being buffeted by everyone else's energy. So that was a part of it. But some of it really was a well of other lifetimes that just needed to move. And you will be able to clear so many more past lives so much faster if you don't require that you get your cognition involved. If you're willing to just feel something deeply without context and breathe through it and allow it to move and let it be felt and use your tools. Fire ceremony is a good one for, wow, I'm really bogged down in a lot of emotion. It's starting to feel overwhelming. Breath work, walks in nature, just tend to yourself. And, if something spins out, like, for sure, it's good to be discerning about like, wow, I think I have a chemical imbalance. This seems more like a medical experience of depression than something that's just moving through and clearing out. But if you don't have to have a why, you can move many lifetimes of painful energy very, very quickly. The why will slow you down. And I love the why. Anyone who's done a session with me knows that I talk for, an enormous amount of time with all the messages from the guides and all the context because it's interesting and engaging and super cool. And I think it's really useful to make meaning out of our experiences. However, I just want to leave you with the thought that when it comes to past lives, if you're willing to just move the energy and not have your third chakra, your thinking mind, your sense of identity get involved, you will clear out thousands of times faster the weight that your soul is carrying in these imprints. So I want to make the case for it, even knowing how meaningful it can be to have some of these stories. And it may be that you collect a few of these stories, but then are willing to just let the dynamic nature of whatever's left move. So whatever your journey, whether it's appropriate to have some support from me or another practitioner, whether you want to do, active shamanic journeying, I gave you my map, but if you're working with your guides, they may have a completely different way to help you clear past lives, or you want to just do the fire ceremony. These are all really powerful ways. And the cool thing is, with proof of concept, you can do a little bit of this work as an experiment. And I think it's very likely that you will feel more spaciousness and lightness and freedom very quickly, which means you don't have to do the fire ceremony to clear past lives on blind faith forever. Ideally, you'll move some energy and you'll feel the results, which will make it worth continuing. Or if you don't, there just may be something else to focus on at this time. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.